What's going on, everybody? This is Brian Turner here on another episode of the No Stress Midwest podcast. It's kind of crazy that we're in our season finale, episode 8, but we had to, and I wanted to save the best for last. We're joined by Ian Barker of United Soccer Coaches. Ian, how's it going, man?
Good, Brian, and flattery will indeed get you everywhere you want to go. So that's good. Thank you.
Well, that's I try. So yes, for the listeners on, Ian Barker is the Director of Coaching Education at United Soccer Coaches. He's been in the role for quite some time now, and coincidentally, United Soccer Coaches is headquartered here in Kansas City, like 5 minutes from my house. So that's kind of crazy, and that kind of touches on how Ian and I met. So Ian, I don't know, do you want to talk about the Memphis story? I wore the hat just for this.
Yeah, sure. So I was about 2 years ago, right? I was doing a ODP event in Memphis. I was working with my colleague Nathan Hunt, who was the state director of Kansas Youth Soccer at the time, and he and I were walking together, and there was this tall, lanky guy walking behind us, kind of like a puppy, but he was wearing a United Soccer Coaches hat. So I said, way to go, way to represent. And that young man barely acknowledged my comment. And then about 5 minutes later, he's like, oh, you're the guy that kind of runs the education part of that. I'm sorry. And then because of your personality, I've known you and spoken to you on a weekly basis ever since, because you're good at tracking people down and respectfully asking for connections and advice and mentorship and sharing. So it's amazing. It's actually 2 years since we had that first interaction in Memphis.
Yeah, it was like in February, and I write every time I meet up with Ian. It's probably once a month that we meet, but since times have been where they are, it's probably been more frequently. And I just write in a little book all the notes that I want to ask him. And I remember our first meeting, and we sat down and grabbed coffee, and it felt like an interview to me. You like had a few questions set. You were asking them, like they were like not so much rapid fire, but I could tell you were looking for a response from each type of question, and it looks like I passed. But yeah, Ian's been a mentor of mine probably since then. He's helped me out with a ton of stuff, given me a lot of ideas. I'm able to bounce stuff off of him, and it's been good. So thank you, Ian, and thank you for being on the call, man. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
So let's kind of go back a bit. So I haven't been in the Midwest for too long, but I've been around the U.S. and I've heard different accents, and I can't quite make out yours in any part of the United States. So where are you from, and kind of how did you end up here in the States?
Well, I'm originally from England, having a pretty neutral English accent from the south of the country, but having lived in the US for 33 years, the Americanisms in the English accent, people think I'm Australian or New Zealand or South African, but I'm English. But I've lived in America for more than half my life, because I came in '87. I came through an exchange with the University of Wisconsin originally, kind of connected that way. And I did take a coaching badge in England when I was playing collegiately. So I did start kind of getting some coaching ideas while I was still a very active player. When I came to this country, there was certainly more opportunities to make a living in coaching than there was in playing. But I continued to play for quite a long time with a club called the Madison 56ers. We won the US Amateur National Championship, which is now the Hank Steinbrecher Cup. We won that in 1992. And we were probably kind of an A-League level type club before, because at that time, the only pro was really indoor.
Yeah.
And I loved playing and was able to play at a good amateur level in this country. But coaching was always going to be the thing that put food on the table. And so I lived in Madison, Wisconsin. Then I lived in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and now I live in Kansas City, Missouri.
All right, and while you mentioned you came here through Wisconsin and you were there for a bit, so I know that you coached there for a while, as well as at, how do you pronounce it, Malacaster
Or McAllister even, yeah, McAllister.
or McAllister even or McAllister even, yeah. So so talk to me about your experience with getting into the college level coaching. You said that you were pretty active as a player getting into coaching while you were playing. So was it something you knew you always wanted to do, was coach? How did you kind of segue your playing career into that coaching career?
Yeah, so as a youth player and a collegiate player, I'm one of those people that ends up, I just tended to be the captain or an organizer. And we had the opportunity to bring an English FA coaching badge to the university in England. And a lot of my playing colleagues were PE students, so it was a good thing for them to do.
Mm-hmm.
And when I took the badge, um, I think that the instructor and some of my colleagues realized that some of us were better at coaching than others, and some of us had a bit more of an aptitude for it. And at the time, I was also doing a master's degree in secondary education, so they were kind of a good combination. And then when I came to this country, coaching was a great opportunity. People loved English accents even more back then. So we were kind of the migrant workers of the soccer business at that time. And it seemed pretty clear that I was quite good at it too. So as you know, there are tons of American coaches and foreign coaches in this country who are just coaches because there's somebody that will pay them. But then there's a very big number of people that learn the trade, have an aptitude for it, and it was quite easy for me to balance the playing and the way my skills as a player were not really based in the technical. They were based more in the physical and also tactical and good communication. So I'm one of those people that was a modest player, but was able to translate my playing skills to my coaching.
And I think that that's big, something you touched on, because as you, was not the best soccer player, I don't think. But I really feel like that I did see things that I just wasn't able to do all the time. And it took me a while to transition and realize that I went from playing to coaching. But once I did, I was really able to see that I think I have a knack for it, and at least I enjoy doing it. So yeah. So okay, so you got into coaching that way. You were at Wisconsin. I saw that you won a Big Ten national championship while you were there. How was that experience like, and kind of how has coaching changed in your opinion from back then to maybe 5 years ago to even now and 5 years in the future?
Sure. So back in the late 80s, early 90s, I was making more money as a high school coach than I was going to make as a Division I college assistant. And neither of those amounts were very big. But the head coach of the University of Wisconsin said to me, look, we'd like you to come and help, but we can't pay you very much. Big Ten, Division I, football, everything, but still not very much money. And I said, I'd love to do it, and I'll give up the better paying gig of high school, but I want to coach. I don't want to be like the running around, doing the halftime shootout with the kids and stuff like that.
Yeah, setting up cones.
The coach was great. He let me coach right from the beginning. So I was with the University of Wisconsin for 8 years. And in the middle of that time, we got full scholarships. So I was the recruiter, and we recruited some very good players out of Michigan from the Vardar Club. We had a couple of excellent foreigners, a couple of Norwegian guys, and then players from Minnesota could get in-state tuition at Wisconsin because the Gophers didn't have a program. So we had this wonderful storm of opportunity. And when they were seniors in 1995, and there was 8 of them, 8 seniors, we made it to the Final Four. We went to Richmond. We beat Portland and Virginia, Duke beat Virginia, and then we beat Duke in the final. And interestingly, that's still the biggest crowd in NCAA tournament history. The last time was 1995, and they haven't had a crowd that big since. So it kind of tells you
And
a
you
lot
also
about where
haven't
college.
coached. You also haven't coached in a game that big since. So is one to the other? Do you think? Because
Yeah.
you
So,
haven't coached there.
oh no, the University of Wisconsin after we left had some pretty lean times. So I'll take all the credit for the success and none of the credit or none of the grief for the demise. And then I went to McAllister, which is Division III, and did 13 years with them. And the biggest difference, if you've got young people thinking about college coaching now, boy, it was a lot easier back then in terms of how hard you had to work, because the technologies were less, the competitive nature of it was different, and so you didn't have to know every single player in America and everything about them just to compete.
Yeah.
So how hard young assistants have to work now in the recruiting business particularly, and then head coaches and assistants in the expectations of the programs in terms of sports sciences and all of the NCAA rules. So it's a really full-time professional job at the Division I level, and then obviously it scales down from there into D2, D3, NAIA, etc.
Right. Okay. Well, and then after your college years, you were at the you moved to Minnesota, right? And you were the DOC there for MYSA, so Minnesota Youth Soccer Association. And it's funny, so for the listeners, when I found that out, this was I don't know, a few months ago, we pinpointed it back that I was actually a youth player in Minnesota at the time while Ian was the DOC. And I knew that it was ran like crap then, but now I know why at 7.
Yeah.
But no, so you were the DOC there for 10 years. When you came into the role, what was your vision with how you wanted to change the landscape of youth soccer in Minnesota? And
Sure.
when you left, what was that vision? What was that landscape like? Did you implement anything that you wanted to, or?
Yeah, just a little context. So the head coach at the University of Wisconsin was fired a year after winning the national championship. Big controversy, and they don't renew the assistant. So I went to Minnesota to be the state DOC, and a couple of years into that, I also took on the McAllister job. So I did McAllister and the youth soccer at the same time. Then ultimately, I just went full-time with the college. But for the 10 years I was the state DOC, in Minnesota at the time, they ran all of the leagues. So everybody that played competitive youth soccer in Minnesota belonged to the state association, and they ran the leagues. And my number one job when I came in, that I took upon myself, was to drive around the state and try to connect all the dots on the map. Because obviously the soccer's really tight in Minneapolis and St. Paul, a little bit in Rochester, a little bit in Duluth, but there's tons of soccer. So I was really, really happy. I was single at the time. They gave me a Chevy minivan, and I would drive to these small communities and just kind of help them with their soccer. So you drive halfway into the middle of Minnesota, just, country everywhere. And then there'd be a meat packing plant. So there'd be a whole bunch of kids whose parents played soccer. They love soccer. And then there'd be the rural, the more rural farming community, more of the indigenous, if you will. So really interesting. Over time, because the state association was quite well off, and because they let me do my job, some of the good things that we did that I'm proud of, and I've talked about it when I've gone back, we were able to make the ODP available to everybody. So some people still paid full dollar, but we were able to create scholarship funds. So in Minneapolis, very big East African community.
Okay.
In St. Paul, a very big Laotian Hmong community. And then in North Minneapolis, a lot of particularly Liberian. And so really talented kids, especially on the boys' side.
Yeah.
And we were able to get them in, and a couple of them went on to MLS, and a couple found colleges they would not have found if it hadn't been for ODP. So I know ODP is a 4-letter word for many people, but if it's run well, and you've got some enlightened leadership and you've got some resources, you can really do a lot of good with it. So that was a lot, that was then. And the other thing that ODP helped me with was we were able to get on our women's staff, at least every single girl that came into our girls ODP had a woman coach, because we were able to put at least one female coach with every age group. So it wasn't perfect,
right?
But that was big. And then, of course, coaching education. So one year, we actually did more coaching education in Minnesota than the rest of the Midwest put together, including Illinois and Michigan. So I was really proud of that. But the type of community that Minneapolis, St. Paul particularly are, a lot of commitment to higher education. And so coaching education was an attractive thing for them.
All right. Now, are you still in touch with that community? Is there anyone that while you were there that's still there or still kind of around that you can talk to and just kind of see how things are going?
Yeah. Well, so very much a much older version of you, right? You keep connections with the people you've run into, and you stay connected, because it's amazing how big soccer is in this country, but how small a community we can be at times, right? And how many, so many MLS guys, and a lot of coaches and coach educators. So I do keep in touch. One of the big sadnesses for me is that US Club is now very big in Minnesota youth soccer. So it's great for opportunity for people, but sometimes, as you know, the relationship between competing associations takes away from their good initiatives.
Yep.
And so right now, the US Club, USYS tension in Minnesota is quite destructive. And I think a lot of good coaches on both sides and a lot of kids that are affiliated are probably not using all of their resources in the best interest of the development of the game.
Yeah.
But that is, that's everywhere. And that's the nature of the business, partly because it's a career and it's an economy for so many people.
And it comes down to the money. And
it does.
I mean, unfortunately, that's where, that's what people's motives are with it. And don't get me wrong. You need to make money in this world to survive. But I feel like things like coaching, education, if you will, are things that money usually isn't in there, and you're doing it for the passion and for the love of it. But yeah, so, all right. So Ian, you currently coach still, but in a less way, not less way, but not in a full-time role. What kind of capacity are you coaching, and when did you realize you wanted to kind of take that step fully away from coaching and just focus on the maybe education or the administrative part of it?
Yeah. So I was really happy at my Division III school full-time. But after 4 years of full-time, I felt a little bit unfulfilled because the level of commitment to the program, no, that's not fair. The level of commitment to the program of the guys was outstanding, but they're Division III athletes and they're not on a pro path or they're not scholarshiped. So I felt like I needed a slightly new challenge. And when I looked around, probably at my age, early 40s, jumping into the pro ranks, the fledgling MLS, or was going to be a little bit more difficult and certainly a lot less secure. So coaching education, which I'd done and had been doing all the time, seemed good. So I've quite enjoyed this job. It's given me international travel. I've met some top coaches. I've presented with top coaches. So it's been a real, really exciting from that point of view to rub shoulders with those.
Yeah.
I'm still able to coach in ODP, and I run the Midwest Boys ODP. And then most of my in-person coaching, pre-COVID and hopefully post-COVID, is in clinics and seminars. So, I get sent to Hawaii occasionally, and they'll give me a group of players, and I might work with them 3 or 4 times, but it's much more in a clinic session than it is in a team development setting. For
sure. And and it's cool to hear. To me, I just love hearing about ODP and kind of the path of it, because you've been involved with it obviously a lot longer than I have, but I can remember playing in New Jersey. I still have my ODP tryout shirt. And I can remember how big of a deal that was then when you made your state pool and when you made the team. And then with talking to different pro players that I've had on who have been found because of ODP and have made their way up through to the youth national team because of it. And then now going back into it and being a coach and doing my part to try to find those next kids that aren't in the position to maybe play for a top club or all of that. It's really cool. And now you're at a level where the kids that I pick, right, for my state team, if any of them make it past that level, then they go up if they're in your age group, and then you coach them. And then who do you play against at that level? Sorry. So like when you're coaching the Midwestern teams, and like what are you playing against other regions in the country?
Yeah. So the model still exists of, area teams become state teams play their region, then you get a regional team. There are 4 regions. We then play region against region, and then we in the case most recently I had 06s, boys. So I was able to take 23 boys from the ODP regional to a national event. So I had a 23-man national team. And we had boys on that from Maine and from Kentucky and from Florida and from Hawaii and from Utah and everywhere else. And so, and pretty much once we put them together and we showcased them, most of them got picked up into MLS programs.
Yeah.
But of course, if you live in Maine or you live in Hawaii, there isn't MLS, right? So one of the options could be your club, it could be ECNL, State Cup, it could be that. But one of your other options could be ODP. And so really, when ODP is run well, we're really on the boys' side identifying players that maybe MLS can't see, has missed, doesn't have the resources. So currently on the boys' side, ODP has a really good sort of synergistic relationship with MLS.
Yeah.
So if a boy showed up at one of our tryouts here in Kansas or Missouri, and from a rural area, or they just came to town, and you and I thought they were really, really good, we just called John Parry.
Yeah.
We wouldn't try to keep him in ODP. Exactly. We try to push him.
Yep.
On the girls' side, ODP is a much stronger connection to the national team program, and a much stronger connection to collegiate programs, because obviously NWSL is not really in a position to finance scouting and academies. So, back in the day when you were a player, ODP was probably the primary route to the U.S. men's national programs. It's not the case anymore,
right?
But MLS is in there, which is great.
Yeah. So
and USL,
right. So you've been the director of coaching education, United Soccer Coaches, for 8 years. What has been probably the top 1 or 2 things that you've been really excited about that you've been able to accomplish in your time there?
Well, I think the thing that kind of keeps you going and makes it fun, and my colleague Vince Gansberg is a great collaborator. He's out of Indiana. Is the traditional ways of delivery of coaching education is reimagining them, right? So some of them are still in there, the traditional ways that some of your listeners will know. You go away for 5 days, you get physically abused and mentally abused, and then you have this kind of test for 20 minutes and that's it. But obviously, prior to COVID, we were doing much more in the blended space with technologies, Zoom meetings, video, match analysis, that type of thing. So there's so many great innovations now. And even for the grassroots coach, even for the mum and dad who's going to go out and coach, their own son and daughter twice a week for an hour,
right.
Resources, using social media. So it's kind of fun to always be innovating. The challenge is when it's your full-time job, you tweak too much sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes I need to get a program going and just sit back and relax for 20 minutes, but that's hard to do. Yeah.
Well, and I have not taken any United Soccer Coaches courses in person yet. I was signed up for one and then COVID happened. But I've talked to people that have taken courses both through U.S. Soccer and through United Soccer Coaches. And I hear, I mean, amazing reviews about United Soccer Coaches Premier, Advanced National, just all the diplomas. And I think that when I do hear that, and I'm like, oh, that's I know the guy who's kind of running that, and it's like, okay. And so when I talk to you, I know that you've got the right idea, and it's not so much, hey, you have to do what I say because I said it type of thing. It's you're having people come up with a response and an answer, and if you can defend it, then you rock with it. And that's something that I appreciate when we do talk tactics. It doesn't happen often, but yeah, I think it's good what you're doing there.
Well, I think that America is different than any other country in the development of the sport for very many reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But one of them is we're so big and we're so diverse. So if we get together in a course, one, there's going to be more diversity in the candidate pool than there would be in pretty much any country in the world.
Yeah.
You can have, grassroots mom and dad coaches, and you can have young MLS coaches and college coaches all in the same class. So I just believe as educators, you want to have good content, but you also want to say, Brian, how would you use this in your Kansas suburban high school?
Yeah.
Or John Parry, how would you use this at an MLS full-blown academy?
Right.
Or Dauda Conte, how would you use this in your grassroots recreation program?
Mm-hmm.
And so this has been a thing for me the last couple of years, but everybody uses words like elite and excellent and expert. And I would say this: everybody is an expert in their own environment, because nobody knows what it's like when you're out there for that hour and 15 minutes with your kids in your complex. And if we don't honor that as professionals, coach educators, fellow coaches, and I think you and I would agree, there are some really, really bad elite competitive coaches, and there are really some fantastic mum and dad grassroots coaches. So it's not the level of player, it's actually the level of person that's in that environment teaching and pushing it forward.
Agreed. And I think you touched on a big point, especially in coaching education, is how do you apply this information in the course to your home environment? Because everyone's environment is different. And I can remember talking when I was in a coaching course where it was me and another high school coach. And our two high school environments could not be any more polar opposites, where I have at our school 2 turf fields that we can work from that we don't play any games on. And he's fighting for a grass pitch that isn't even a regulation field. It's just different. And I think that's the biggest thing, is how can you apply what you learn from these courses into your home environment?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. So I know you've got a very mixed following, but for those people that are in that coaching space and learning, if I control the player's academic schedule, their personal schedule, everything, then having some really uptight, we're going to do this activity for 30 seconds at 80% intensity, and then we're going to do this one, makes total sense, right? But if I'm a grassroots coach or a competitive club coach, and the kids are coming from 5 different schools, and they may have PE or not, or maybe some are coming from basketball practice, and others have been sitting on the couch playing EA Sports.
Yep.
It is absolutely stupid to waste my time going, okay, we're going to do this activity with all the players at 80% intensity. How you measure that, I don't really know if you're grassroots, for 3 3-minute cycles. It's just nonsense.
Yeah.
And I'll argue that with pretty much anybody you want to bring on.
Oh man, I love it. I love it. I would definitely be interested in setting that up, because I have my opinions and views on that as well. But enough into that. So if you could think of one thing in the States that's missing from getting us from whatever type of program you want to call the U.S. soccer to one of the top 10 countries, right, in soccer, what would you say that one thing would be?
Well, one thing that we can't change, but is a simple fact we should all accept, is we have American football, basketball, baseball, hockey, maybe in the women's sports a bit more volleyball, and we can't change that, but we should acknowledge that when we're getting down on ourselves, right? Because soccer is the number one sport for men in most of the world where we compete.
Right.
So that will never change, or not certainly in your lifetime or my lifetime.
Yeah.
So we accept that. But things we could change. I think too often clubs are not clubs; they're collections of teams within a club. And this is something we could change, where a club has maybe an under 23 or an adult amateur team, and there's more identification with a bar or restaurant or a club that everybody goes to, and the little boys and girls on the 8, 9, 10 program go watch the boys and girls on the 12, 13 program, and so on. We don't do a very good job in this country, in my opinion, with creating those identities which are bigger than our immediate involvement.
Yep.
And I think that's really sad. I think there are too many tryouts. There are too many players traveling between all these different clubs and transferring. Now, coaches add into that and clubs add into that, right? Because clubs offer tryouts and they recruit people's kids, and coaches move around. So I just think we need a bit more stability in the sort of identity with the club and something bigger than ourselves. I think that is huge. And then I think that when I go to a sporting game, I'm a season ticket holder. I have been for 8 years. Sometimes people go there purely for recreation, and they don't see it as the highest level on the men's side. And then they're not aware that Swope Park Rangers exist, and they don't go there. And then they're not going out to watch Avila play or Baker or Park. And I think that all of us need to be a little bit more aware of the A to Z of soccer in our communities, and more supportive of the A to Z of soccer in our communities.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. And I'm guilty of it as well, going to the sporting games and using it as a networking event, right? Saying hi to people that I know. But if there's one thing, I was at the game yesterday, and being able to be socially distanced from people, but being in like a tight area with the people you were with, I was like, this is the best way that I love watching a game, because it's less fans that are cheering for the dumbest things ever, like a 40-yard clearance or a shot that's like 30 yards off target. And then the Swope guys are sporting too now. I was just at their match the other week, and watching them play is awesome, because you get to see, I mean, I think majority of them are academy guys. And you know that sporting is very, very big on trying to bring people up. So it's like you're getting a chance to see the future of sporting, or the future of the MLS right here, which I think people don't take advantage of, like you said.
I think the USL product as a whole is outstanding. It's sort of that, it's even in Great Britain, where I'm from, Premier League has got a bit bloated at times, right? So as much as I like going out to see sporting play, I do like going down and watching, or when they were at Swope, but even now, I like watching the smaller crowds. You get a bit closer. These are kids, players you can relate to a bit more. Yep. And then many of the USL teams are not related to MLS, right? So they're small independent franchises. So it's really that pioneering spirit of soccer, which America is still very much in, whereas Holland and France and Germany and England are just older and more mature. I mean, MLS is 25 years old. It's relatively still a young league, and I think it's a really good product.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's an interesting dynamic seeing Swope or Sporting 2, who's our second team, play against teams in the USL where it's their first team, like Reno or Sacramento or OKC. And the dynamic in crowds is, I mean, it shows what they choose to look at as a first team and how a second team is.
Yeah.
But yeah, so a question that I want to peg you for, and And I'm not, it's okay if my followers don't have this same aspiration, but as a grassroots coach, as I am, wanting to get into that pro level, right? That pro rank. What's some advice that you give, and not just to myself, but I know that I have a lot of friends and followers that are young coaches as well, maybe in college, club, but maybe looking to get into that pro rank. What are some bits of advice or anything you'd like to pass on?
Yeah. So with every situation like this, I think the first thing is to be very self-aware, right? So your best friend Brian could want to achieve the same thing, but he or she might not be willing to make the same commitment or different commitments. So, for example, if you have responsibilities to a family, it's harder to make some brave decisions and take a pay cut to pursue a dream than if you've got to put food on the table for other people, right? So the first thing you have to do is be very clear on your own situation and very clear on your own level of resilience. If you're somebody that's easily discouraged, pursuing a pro pathway is probably
not
the way to go.
Yeah.
I definitely think coaching qualifications are huge because I think they show a commitment to learning. But probably the greatest value is the connections and networking you make, right?
Yeah.
And some of the people, depending on the level of course you're at, will be in the same situation as you, but maybe your instructor will be a high-level coach, or maybe you'll be in with some pro players and you make connections into the pro ranks through the player base, which I know is something you've done. I was working recently with a young college student, non-traditional college student in Minnesota, and he just reached out to a whole bunch of USL clubs and said, can I come be a fly on the wall for 2-3 days? And John Pasquarella at Oklahoma and Coach Rennie at the Indy 11 both said, sure. And so this guy shows up, he watches training, he goes into the team meetings, they let him in, and he just basically did a study trip. And he made a commitment of his own time and money, and he found some people that were willing to help him, and he went that route. I think, you and I have talked about it a lot. To get into the pros, you're probably better going into the elite youth programs and then trying to get into an academy setting than it would be necessary to teach coach high school or go the college route.
Right.
So if the young coach said to me, I really want to be the coach at KU one day, I would give him or her a different pathway to that than maybe somebody that wanted to coach USL and potentially NWSL or MLS. But I think more than anything, self-awareness, because I think everybody can wake up in the morning and say, yeah, I'd like to coach in the MLS. But there are only so many people that have the spirit and personality for like a Peter Vermees, right? Or a Bruce Arena, or a Laura Harvey, or a Vladko. So you've got to be the right kind of personality too.
Yeah. And I think that's big, and you've touched on a lot of stuff. One thing for me, and we talked about this over coffee last week, as I told you, like, I think my fear of rejection is at zero. So for me, when I hear stories of people just emailing coaches and sending out a mass, what you would equate now to a mass text, full send, I'm okay with that, because if one person answers out of 50, that's one more person than you had before.
Okay, so if your mum is listening to the podcast and some of your friends, when you said to me you're used to rejection, do you remember what I responded?
Yes, you you said that's a great quality for a young single guy in the bar scene.
Yeah, and you said absolutely, because I've been rejected way more times than I've had good luck. So there you go.
Yes, definitely. But I had a friend that told me that hey, batting 300 gets you in the Hall of Fame. So I like that. All right. So Ian, I've talked to a lot of my followers and kind of just getting some generic questions that they've put together that I want to ask my followers. So for you, like, let's see, what do you think is more beneficial for a youth player to get to the pro rank? Do you think it's going through DA? Do you think it's going through high school? Do you think it's maybe a combo of high school ODP? Do you think it's just club? is it a culmination of all of it? What advice or what do you suggest for the young kids listening?
Sure. On the boys' side, I think if you want to have an MLS or USL future, obviously an MLS academy is a good place to be, but it comes at the expense of your club soccer, your youth club soccer, and it comes at the expense of your high school.
Mm-hmm.
And if it goes well for you around that 16, 17 age, it's going to come at the expense of collegiate soccer too. So if you want to go that route, you've got to understand what you potentially are giving up.
Yeah.
And if you go that route and then the academy doesn't play you a lot and you're kind of, you're holding on. And at the end of the day, the academy releases you, you've sacrificed a lot, right? So I could make the case that academies maybe start a bit too young.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe academies have maybe too many guys, given that only, a tiny handful are going to be the Beaslers and the Sesanovics and the Zuzis.
Right.
And I also think that if you are good enough and you keep your head on your shoulders, so you decide you're going to stay with your friends for an extra year and you're going to enjoy being the captain of your high school team and learning about leadership, right? Which is not going to help you technically and tactically, but help you. So I still think the roots are there. As recently as 2014, basically half of the World Cup squad was collegiate products, at least of 2 years. So Matt Beasler and Graham Zuzi, Omar Gonzalez would be examples.
Mm-hmm.
Then there were the Americans that had gone the residency route.
Yep.
And then there were obviously the German Americans.
Yeah.
So
and it's crazy how the German Americans are their own,
yeah.
Jurgen just brought in the German Americans, that's funny to me. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
But
I was just saying.
No. But as recent as 2014, college was still producing U.S. men's national team players getting into the second round of the World Cup.
Right.
So I think that and if the young boy, and we're talking about boys right now, is in Idaho or Iowa,
mm-hmm.
do they want to relocate in pursuit of their dream, or do they want to live with their families, play good competitive club soccer, and make that move later?
Right.
On the girls' side, the pro opportunities are just really not that profound. And so I still think if you're advising young women,
mm-hmm.
you would say, enjoy your club, play high school if it's available to you and it's a good experience, but not necessarily winning or losing, because your club might be a higher standard than your school,
right.
But you still can learn things. And then, as you'd advise any young person, try to find your 2-year or 4-year, post-high school graduation academic opportunity, and then see where college soccer can lead you. So different pathways for different genders.
Mm-hmm.
And different locations geographically. There's a different pathway for everybody, and so your own pathway does need to be somewhat custom built,
right,
for your preferences.
Right, and I think that's another good point you've brought up, especially for the young coaches listening, and I'm someone that can attest to it. Is everyone has their own pathway, and my path to get here is going to be different than the next person's, and there's no reason why we both can't go on our own path to get up there. But another thing you touched on earlier is being self-aware and knowing if, hey, my best friend is trying to be an MLS head coach and he's trying to get the same job that I'm trying to get, well, how long have we been friends? Or you've got to be cautious, because if you're telling this person, hey, I just met with Ian and he said he's going to introduce me to PV, and then that guy says, oh, I know Ian too, let me ask for the same introduction. Now that could be, someone that's there. So I
also think, and I wouldn't say I'm a overly optimistic or pessimistic guy. I like to think I'm pretty pragmatic. This sort of notion, if you want it bad enough, you'll get it. I disagree, right? Because if I want to be a center in the NBA, it ain't going to happen. I'd like to be a prima ballerina. It ain't going to happen. So if you're a young player and you're not particularly athletically gifted, or you love doing 3 other things, God bless you, and just be a competitive player in
Yeah.
our case, Heartland, right? What's
Yep.
wrong with that? You know, not
Yep.
everybody. So this I think sometimes is parentally driven. Sometimes
Of
it's
course.
media driven. Maybe it's
Yeah.
a little bit of our American culture, but it is not the case that just if you want it bad enough, you will get it. Very often, you ain't gonna get it.
No, I wanted $1 million. I've been wanting that for a while. And I haven't got it. But yeah,
I gotta buy a T-shirt from you, right? And you can get a little more margin on one of your
there
no
we go.
stress
I'll get that much closer.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's a quote I use to my kids. There's two types of people: ones who say they want to win, and those who refuse to lose.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone says they want to win. Everyone wants to win a state championship. Everybody wants to be the best, blah, blah, blah. But it's the people that refuse to lose those games that I think makes the biggest difference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so next topic. When does the U.S. win the World Cup? I've heard some as soon as 2026. I've heard others say never. What's your opinion? You've been here for a while. You've seen the country. You've seen the world grow. What do you think?
After 2002 and up until probably five to 8 years ago, I would have said anytime soon, and probably before England, which is my home country. England has done some really interesting things in the development of soccer recently in conjunction with, so the relationship between the FA and the Premier League is not bad. The youth national teams are more integrated. Yeah. So England, I think, is actually in an ascendancy. Obviously, the disappointment of not making a World Cup is very traumatic. And now COVID and the team is in a lot of transition. But you look at Tyler Adams, you look at Pulisic, McKennie, a number of these young guys. I mean, there's talent there, but it's not the deepest I've ever seen. And I would also say this, in fairness to Greg Berhalter, who I don't know personally at all, might be just about the hardest job in international team management, because if you pick a more Hispanic-based style, everybody says we should be more Northern European. If you go more Northern European, everybody says we should play more like Mexico and Costa Rica. No other country in the world has that degree of challenge. 6 time zones, a really good professional league in MLS, but then you've got all these players in Europe.
Yep.
I think it's a really tough job. And I think that we need to see more young Americans coming through the academies and getting meaningful playing opportunity in the MLS, and then making their jumps to maybe bigger leagues. That's what I'd like to see.
Yeah.
But, you know, I was talking to some MLS coaches the other day, and they can go into Central and South America and find very affordable talent that is very polished and ready to go. And so it is difficult if you're a young American to make the graduation from academy to MLS even. Yeah. So we've got to keep plugging away. But assuming that we make the 22 World Cup, I think US is doing fine. I mean, Brazil, Argentina, Germany, Italy, France, they're probably going to dominate for a few more years yet. But yeah. US is in the mix of a quarterfinal team for sure. Yeah.
Well, and when do you think, as a coach, and you know, obviously it's there's a lot of factors that go into it. We're not in the locker room, but when do you think we make the decision to let the young boys play and not retire, but have the older MLS people kind of take a back burner and let the McKennies, the Pulisics, the Tyler Adams, the Sergino Dest, the Conrads, the Matthews, all of them? Do you think that happens in time to make the next World Cup, or do we wait until we qualify and then try to do something?
No, I think I get my sort of thought is right now that we will stumble into the next World Cup along the same lines we currently have. But at some point, if the pressure, you know, depending on what the sort of the new leadership in the federation looks like post-COVID, and how much the MLS is willing to support the federation initiatives, because they're their own businesses, right? And those owners and things like that. But interesting, you know, just thinking about this, somewhere around the world, there are people talking about, when will our women's team win a World Cup? What do we have to do to be like the US, right? So we're having this tough discussion about the men's side of the game.
Yeah.
But there are scores of countries around the world that would want to win a World Cup and have women do it on a pretty consistent basis. So, that's why the conversation of development of football in this country is interesting, because it's two different conversations for men and women. And in most countries, you barely even talk about women's soccer. So, that's a good thing that we should all be proud of.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's great that our women's side's able to continue to play at the level and dominate at the level they do day in and day out, when they are in complete contrast with the federation. And I know that weighs on them mentally. Obviously, the last World Cup, when we had Rapinoe and going back and forth with the current president before a World Cup game, and then she has to deal with that on top of performing. It weighs on you.
Yeah.
So, all right, man, we're going to wrap this up here. I've got one final thing for you. Oh, what do you got?
I want to hit the final thing first.
Okay. So I want to ask you of your dream five-a-side. Okay. So I need you to think of you plus 4 other people, anyone that you've played with ever in your life, and then you plus 4 other people, anyone you wish to play with ever.
Okay. I didn't know I was going to get 2 teams. So, wow. On the team, this won't mean anything to anybody, but the best American I played with at a good amateur level was a player out of Madison. His name was Brian Jaworski. His brother is the head coach of Grinnell College in Iowa, and Dave Jaworski is the guy I'm talking about, is now a referee, top referee.
Okay.
So there's Dave. I played with a Dutch player who had been with Ajax and Utrecht, who played on the 56ers with us. So a Dutch guy whose name was Gus Compier. And then I played with a guy in high school who played 250 times in the English first and second divisions, called Gary Smart. And I got to have a goalie, right?
You got to have a goalie.
Okay. Probably the highest level goalie I got to knock around with was a woman called Siri Mullinix, who played at North Carolina. All right. And Siri was a national team goalie for a while as well here in the US. So that's people I know.
All right. And let's get the other squad.
Yeah, my other squad in goal would be Alisson from Brazil and Liverpool. Mm-hmm. I would be the.
Is he the greatest goalie? Is he the greatest goalie right now? Playing right now over Neuer?
Different styles of goalkeeper.
Okay. All right. That's fair.
And there's a reason why I didn't choose Neuer. I'll come back to it. So Alisson's in goal. I'm the bottom of the diamond. On the left and right of me, in front of me, is Kevin De Bruyne and Steven Gerrard. And up front is Lewandowski. And after we've got the game won, I'm going to just sit out and I'm going to put Maldini in my place.
Okay. All right. So,
but the reason I didn't pick Neuer was because I got Lewandowski.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right.
Appreciate that.
That's a squad right there. Lewandowski, Stevie G, KDB, you, and then Maldini. So you're giving yourself the nod over Maldini, which is good. I respect.
Oh yeah, I got to be in it.
I respect that. All right, Ian. So I was going to wrap it up. You raised your hand for one more thing. So
no, I've been agonizing over the five-a-side team, so I was worried you weren't going to ask me, but you got it in, so that's good.
Oh no, yeah, of course. I actually look forward to this. Since you're the last person on the season, I'm going to put all these together in a graphic and kind of just match them up to see what we think is the journey.
Yeah, well, you've had a lot of MLS guys, so their all-star team is going to be different than my playing. I've had some great kids I've coached, though, like Raymond Gaddis, who's with the Union right now. We had Michael Bradley in our ODP program. Seth was in the ODP program. Bees was in it.
Well, I'll match up the dream sides. I won't do the player ones, because I have guys that have played with like Drogba, which I think is probably going to blow out one of your midfielders. It's just my guess. I don't know. But yeah, so Ian, man, I want to thank you for being a guest on the podcast. You've been a great mentor to me so far, and for the people listening, when I told Ian I wanted to do a podcast maybe a year ago, he told me I shouldn't do it. I don't have the time. which at the time was a very fair statement. Uh, COVID happened and things just kind of, went with where they were. And I just kept seeing podcasts coming up. And I was like, this is something I think I could do. And when I finally pitched it to him the second time, his response was, all right, let me know when I can be a guest. So it's really cool that you were there and you wanted to be on. And I think a lot of people are going to listen to this podcast and take something different from it because you're not a player, right? You're not a pro player, but you give a different aspect on the top level picture. And, we have people that are talking about the game in the trenches, right? You're a player. I'm currently coaching. I'm in the trenches. You did the trenches. Now you're on the top, and we're able to kind of see what you're seeing that we're digging through. And now it kind of brings some clarity to the picture on winning us a World Cup eventually.
Yeah. At the
So,
end of the day, to the best of your ability in the community of soccer, try to treat people right. I mean, I think you and I have talked about this, but I'll just leave you with this thought. In the 33 years I've coached in the US, there's less than the number of people I could count on one hand that I wouldn't try to reach out and help if they asked me to. There are lots of people, that I'm not close to, that we're not, and I've been competing with and are against. But in general, our community needs to support itself. So just try to pay it forward and do right by people to the best of your ability.
There we go. We're going to leave it on that note. Ian Barker, thank you so much for being on the call. For the listeners, thank you. This wraps up season 1 of the No Stress Midwest podcast. Everybody, take care.